When I sat down to watch Richard Dawkins and Piers Morgan clash, I knew it wouldn't be a calm discussion. Dawkins, with his razor-sharp dismissal of faith, has never been one to sugarcoat his views. He calls religion a delusion, a fairy tale, a man-made structure that enslaves minds. But when Piers Morgan pressed him on the billions of believers who rely on faith to navigate life, suddenly the debate stopped being about theories and turned into a raw fight over identity, culture, and truth. Piers wasn't just defending religion in an abstract sense, he was defending people. He challenged Dawkins with passion, saying that for many, faith isn't weakness, it's strength. It's what gets someone through tragedy, what gives hope in suffering, what holds families together in a world that seems to break apart more each day. Dawkins, unshaken, fired back that faith should never be an excuse for blind belief. He argued that if something cannot be proven by evidence, it has no business being treated as truth. For him, science is the only light, and anything else is superstition. The audience felt the tension. It wasn't just an academic discussion, it was a battle of worldviews. Morgan leaned in, refusing to let Dawkins dismiss the lived experience of billions. He reminded him that religion has inspired hospitals, schools, civil rights movements, and acts of profound charity. It has provided moral frameworks long before science even began to explain the stars. Dawkins countered with the dark side: wars waged in the name of God, oppression justified by Scripture, and voices silenced because they questioned doctrine. His words hit like sharp blows, but Piers pushed back harder. He asked Dawkins if throwing out religion entirely was fair when it has been a source of resilience for humanity through every era of history. Morgan's tone grew sharper, as though he was speaking not just to Dawkins but to every viewer who has ever felt attacked for believing in something bigger than themselves. What made this clash so gripping wasn't simply the arguments, but the emotion. Dawkins represents a cold, clinical logic, while Morgan embodies the fiery defense of culture, tradition, and human experience. They weren't just disagreeing on God's existence, they were fighting over what makes life meaningful. Morgan reminded Dawkins that for many, prayer isn't about science, it's about survival. It's about crying out in the dark and finding the strength to carry on. He pushed Dawkins on compassion, asking why a man of science couldn't acknowledge that belief, true or not, saves lives every single day. The debate spiraled as both men refused to give ground. Dawkins accused Morgan of appealing to emotion, of clinging to comforting lies, while Morgan accused Dawkins of stripping life of wonder by refusing to see beyond what can be measured. The back and forth became electric, each sentence a spark, each rebuttal a clash of steel. The audience could feel the stakes. This wasn't about winning an argument, it was about defending the right to believe, or the right to doubt. And as the conversation raged on, one thing became clear: this was more than a personal feud. It was a mirror held up to society, reflecting the deepest divide of our age. On one side, the rationalist demand for evidence, certainty, and proof. On the other, the human cry for meaning, belonging, and hope. Dawkins warned of the dangers of blind faith, insisting that science frees the mind, while Morgan thundered that stripping faith from people leaves them empty, unmoored, without a compass. The clash ended not with agreement, but with fire still in the air. Neither man convinced the other, and maybe that was the point. This wasn't about resolution. It was about forcing the world to confront the question: is religion a chain holding humanity back, or a foundation that keeps humanity standing? As the cameras cut away, the debate didn't end, it carried on in the minds of everyone watching. Social media lit up, voices erupted, and the battle over faith roared louder than ever. This is why the showdown gripped so many. It wasn't just about Dawkins versus Morgan. It was about us. It was about the war inside every heart between reason and faith, doubt and hope, science and spirit. And that's why this exchange will be remembered, not because one side won, but because it forced everyone to choose where they stand when religion itself comes under fire. The moment the debate shifted from religion to gender, the energy in the room changed completely. Richard Dawkins, a man rooted in biology, didn't hesitate to make his stance clear. He said there are two sexes, male and female, determined by chromosomes, and that no amount of identity or self-perception could alter that scientific reality. His voice was calm, but his words landed like thunder. Piers Morgan's eyes lit up instantly. He wasn't about to let that pass. For Morgan, this wasn't just about biology, it was about respect, dignity, and the lived reality of people navigating their gender identity in a world that already judges them too harshly. The exchange turned fiery almost immediately. Dawkins insisted that muddying the waters of biological sex with concepts of gender identity risks confusing science itself. He warned that children are being taught ideas that blur fact and fiction, and that society is leaning too far into subjective feelings instead of objective truth. Morgan cut him off, challenging the notion that gender is only science and nothing else. He asked whether Dawkins could understand the struggles of those who feel trapped in the wrong body, whether he could appreciate the courage it takes for someone to live authentically in the face of hostility and discrimination. Dawkins wasn't moved. He said empathy doesn't change chromosomes, and compassion doesn't rewrite DNA. For him, truth cannot bend to comfort. His point was clear: once you let go of reality in favor of feelings, you open the door to chaos. But Morgan's response was even sharper. He accused Dawkins of reducing human beings to statistics and stripping away their humanity. He said that science without compassion is as dangerous as blind faith, and that dismissing identity as a delusion is not only cruel but dehumanizing. The room tightened with tension. Dawkins kept returning to the anchor of science, insisting that words like man and woman lose all meaning if they are not tied to biology. Morgan countered with the real lives of trans people, many of whom face abuse, rejection, and violence, asking Dawkins whether it's worth standing so firmly on science if it means crushing the spirits of those already struggling to survive. At this point, the debate stopped sounding like a discussion and began to feel like a standoff. Dawkins, armed with evidence and evolutionary theory, was immovable. Morgan, fueled by empathy and cultural awareness, was unrelenting. The audience could feel the clash of worlds, one side prioritizing scientific absolutes, the other defending human dignity above all else. Morgan pressed further, questioning whether Dawkins' rigid approach to gender wasn't just outdated but dangerous. He asked him if telling a young person struggling with their identity that they're simply wrong could push them into despair. Dawkins didn't flinch. He said lies, no matter how comforting, should never be told, even to children. He believed truth, however harsh, is ultimately kinder. But Morgan fired back with one of the most passionate moments of the debate, accusing Dawkins of arrogance, of pretending that science alone could answer questions about the human spirit, identity, and belonging. Every word felt like a spark in dry grass. Morgan demanded recognition of the emotional and psychological dimensions of gender, insisting that society must evolve with compassion, not just scientific definitions. Dawkins shook his head, warning that once society allows truth to be dictated by feelings, it risks dismantling the very framework of reality. Both men stood their ground, and the air bristled with conflict. What made this exchange unforgettable wasn't just the words, but the intensity. Dawkins embodied the voice of logic stripped bare, cold, and unyielding. Morgan roared back with fire, arguing for humanity, acceptance, and progress. The debate stopped being about theory and became a reflection of a cultural battlefield raging everywhere, from classrooms to politics to families divided over these very questions. The clash didn't resolve anything, but it exposed the core tension in our times. Do we hold to biological absolutes at all costs, or do we expand our definitions of identity to make space for lived experiences? Dawkins represented the fear of abandoning truth for comfort. Morgan represented the fear of clinging to truth while ignoring human pain. And in between, the audience was left suspended, torn between head and heart. As the cameras rolled on, the heat of the exchange lingered. Morgan accused Dawkins of refusing to evolve with society, while Dawkins accused Morgan of letting culture overwrite science. Neither backed down, and perhaps neither could. That was the real power of the moment. It showed that when gender identity is placed at the crossroads of science and compassion, the clash isn't just intellectual, it's visceral, emotional, and deeply personal. And when the debate ended, the argument didn't die. It leapt out of the studio and into the lives of everyone watching. Social media exploded, some siding with Dawkins' unbending logic, others with Morgan's defense of empathy. The question wasn't settled, but it was amplified. And that's why this debate will be remembered. It wasn't just two men arguing, it was a collision of worlds, one demanding truth, the other demanding compassion, both unwilling to bow. When the debate shifted to morality, it became clear this wasn't just about science or faith anymore. It was about who gets to decide what's right and wrong. Richard Dawkins leaned on his signature belief that morality doesn't need religion. He argued that humans are perfectly capable of building ethical systems from reason, empathy, and evolution without ever opening a Bible or bowing to a higher power. In his view, kindness, cooperation, and justice can all be explained through biology and natural selection. To him, invoking God as the source of morality is not just unnecessary, it's misleading. But Piers Morgan wasn't letting that stand. He fired back with sharp intensity, asking Dawkins whether removing God from the equation doesn't strip morality of its foundation. He pressed the point that if morality is just a human invention, then who decides what's good and what's evil? Who draws the line? For Morgan, faith gives humanity a compass that reason alone cannot provide. Religion, he said, isn't just about worship, it's about accountability, about knowing there's something greater than yourself watching over your actions. Dawkins scoffed at the idea that morality requires divine surveillance. He argued that good people do good things not because they fear punishment from above, but because compassion and cooperation are natural to humanity. He pointed to societies that have thrived without organized religion, insisting that the idea of morality collapsing without God is a myth. Morgan shot back, his voice cutting through the tension, that history shows otherwise. From hospitals to abolition movements to human rights campaigns, faith has been the driving force, giving courage to those who stood against injustice. The clash intensified when Morgan accused Dawkins of reducing morality to mere evolutionary instincts, stripping it of depth, meaning, and purpose. He argued that if morality is just a survival strategy, then it has no real weight, it's just convenient behavior. Dawkins refused to back down. He said morality becomes more authentic when it isn't tied to fear of divine punishment, that doing good simply for the sake of goodness is nobler than obeying rules handed down from heaven. The exchange grew more heated with every sentence. Morgan leaned forward, eyes blazing, asking Dawkins directly if he truly believed societies would remain moral without the guiding framework of faith. Dawkins didn't hesitate. He said people don't need scripture to know murder is wrong or kindness is right, that morality comes from our shared humanity, not from ancient texts. But Morgan's counter struck a nerve. He argued that without a higher authority, morality becomes relative. What one culture calls justice, another could call cruelty. What one leader defines as right, another could define as wrong. Without God, he insisted, morality risks becoming nothing more than opinion. The tension in the room was electric. Dawkins' calm logic clashed violently with Morgan's passionate conviction. Dawkins represented a world guided by reason, free from dogma, where humans chart their own moral destiny. Morgan represented a world anchored by faith, where morality is grounded in something unchanging, something eternal. Neither was willing to give ground. Morgan pressed harder, accusing Dawkins of arrogance, of pretending science can answer questions that touch the soul. He said science can measure the heartbeat, but it cannot measure love, sacrifice, or grace. Dawkins countered that science doesn't need to measure them to recognize their value. He insisted morality shines brightest when it isn't borrowed from ancient rules, but discovered through human empathy and reason. The audience could feel the stakes. This wasn't just an argument over God's role, it was a battle over the very foundation of right and wrong. Was morality born from evolution, or handed down by a creator? Was it flexible and human, or sacred and divine? The questions echoed with every clash of words. The debate ended without resolution, but with fire still in the air. Morgan accused Dawkins of leaving humanity unmoored, while Dawkins accused Morgan of clinging to myths that hold us back. And as the cameras faded, the clash spilled out into living rooms and social feeds everywhere. People took sides, some hailing Dawkins for defending reason, others praising Morgan for standing firm on faith. What made this exchange so gripping was that it touched the deepest fear of all: what happens if morality has no anchor? Can humanity build its own code, or does it need the shadow of God to keep us honest? That was the unspoken question left hanging as the debate closed. And that's why this moment burned itself into memory. It wasn't just about Piers Morgan versus Richard Dawkins. It was about whether morality is a flame we carry ourselves, or a light handed to us from beyond. The tension was never resolved, and maybe it never will be. But the clash forced everyone watching to confront it head-on. What do you believe keeps us good, the science of survival, or the voice of God? The clash between Richard Dawkins and Piers Morgan didn't end when the studio lights dimmed, it exploded the moment the cameras stopped rolling. Social media lit up like wildfire, each clip of the heated exchanges spreading faster than the last. Within minutes, hashtags were trending, with supporters and critics flooding timelines, tearing apart every sentence, every expression, every pause. People weren't just watching, they were choosing sides, digging trenches in a cultural battlefield that extended far beyond a television debate. For Dawkins supporters, the reaction was fierce and triumphant. They praised his unflinching commitment to science, his refusal to bend under pressure, his calm precision against what they saw as Morgan's emotional appeals. They argued that Dawkins spoke the truth many were too afraid to say, that biology is biology, that faith has long overstayed its welcome, that the world needs rationality more than ever in an age drowning in misinformation. To them, he was the champion of reason standing against a tide of irrationality. Memes began flooding in, quoting Dawkins' sharpest lines, casting him as the lone warrior defending science against a noisy mob. But Morgan's defenders were just as relentless. They hailed him as the voice of ordinary people, the man who dared to stand up against the cold arrogance of intellectual elitism. To them, Morgan wasn't just debating Dawkins, he was defending humanity itself. He was giving voice to the billions who find meaning in faith, hope in prayer, and identity in something greater than themselves. Clips of Morgan passionately pushing back went viral, with viewers praising his refusal to let Dawkins belittle religion or dismiss the struggles of those navigating their gender identity. He was lauded as a fighter, someone unafraid to challenge the untouchable authority of science when it forgets the people it claims to serve. The reaction split families, friend groups, and even professional circles. Some saw Dawkins as a hero of truth, others as a heartless academic blind to real life. Some saw Morgan as a defender of compassion, others as a loud provocateur exploiting emotions for ratings. The polarization was complete. Every comment thread became a miniature battlefield, every post a rallying cry for one camp or the other. Mainstream media wasted no time capitalizing on the firestorm. Headlines screamed about the explosive clash, pundits lined up to dissect every angle, and think pieces poured out on whether science or faith should hold moral authority. Late-night hosts joked about it, while morning talk shows debated whether Morgan had finally gone too far or whether Dawkins had revealed just how out of touch academia can be. The public couldn't look away. What made the reaction so intense wasn't just the words exchanged but what those words represented. The debate had touched raw nerves, religion, gender, morality. These weren't abstract ideas, they were the battlegrounds of modern culture. Everyone had skin in the game. For some, Dawkins' words felt like validation, proof that reason still had defenders in a world they saw as descending into chaos. For others, Morgan's fire felt like protection, proof that faith and identity still had defenders in a world they saw as increasingly cold and unfeeling. As the days passed, the debate refused to die. Politicians weighed in, activists used the clips to bolster their causes, and universities even hosted panels to discuss the fallout. The clash had transcended television, it became a cultural moment, a mirror reflecting society's deepest divides. It wasn't about who won, it was about what side you chose, and why. The longer the debate circulated, the clearer it became that the public wasn't just reacting, they were projecting. People saw in Dawkins the uncompromising voice of logic, the assurance that facts still matter in an age of opinion. Others saw in him a cold figure, unwilling to bend, blind to the emotional struggles of ordinary people. People saw in Morgan a defender of faith and compassion, someone unafraid to speak to the heart. Others saw in him a reckless firebrand, more interested in provocation than truth. Both men became symbols larger than themselves. And that was the real eruption. The fight wasn't just Dawkins versus Morgan anymore, it was everyone versus everyone. In living rooms, classrooms, and online forums, people replayed the debate and fought it all over again. Each person became their own Dawkins or Morgan, battling with family, friends, and strangers over science, faith, and the right to define morality and identity. The noise didn't fade, it grew. And in that noise, the debate cemented itself as one of those rare cultural flashpoints that refuses to be forgotten. Not because it settled anything, but because it unsettled everything. It left questions hanging in the air: is faith a strength or a weakness? Does gender belong to biology or identity? Is morality born of evolution or God? Those questions lingered long after the debate ended, demanding answers that no single voice could give. That's why the public reaction was so explosive. It wasn't just outrage for outrage's sake, it was recognition. People saw themselves in the argument. They saw their values, their fears, their hopes being torn apart and defended on live television. That's why every clip was shared, every word analyzed, every side chosen. It wasn't just a debate, it was a cultural earthquake, and the aftershocks are still being felt.